The text illuminated my phone screen at exactly 5:37 in the morning. I was lying in the quiet dark of my brick bungalow on Elm Lane when the automated alert from First National Security Bank arrived. The message contained a single, clinical line. Commercial account access temporarily suspended pending verification of recent authorization changes. I opened my mobile banking portal, only to find a bright crimson banner flashing across the screen. ACCESS denied. Contact County Land Registry Branch. My blood ran completely cold. My late grandfather Arthur's $650,000 downtown retail plaza portfolio had just been locked. If you have ever felt a sinking feeling in your chest when your own family crosses a line, click subscribe. Let me tell you how I caught them. I did not panic. I did not cry. I sat up in bed and dialed my Aunt Jennifer. She answered on the second ring, sounding remarkably alert, wide awake, and incredibly defensive for such an uncharacteristically early hour. She did not ask how I was. Instead, she smoothly launched into a gaslighting routine over the speakerphone. She claimed that she and Uncle Robert had recently met with a wealth advisor because they felt I had been too volatile ever since my design studio downsized. Uncle Robert's voice suddenly cut in from the background, deploying that smooth, practiced insurance-style tone he used to deny claims. He stated that as my next of kin, they had filed an emergency medical authorization form to protect the family asset base. Protect the family asset base. Those were the exact words he used. This brings us to a harsh truth about predatory relatives. It is the trap of normalizing cruelty. Toxic family members do not view your independent assets, your hard-earned stability, or your private life as your own. They view your independence as communal property, a shared reservoir meant to fund their own lifestyle stability. In their minds, they were not stealing from me. They were simply reallocating resources that they felt entitled to. They had convinced themselves that my grandfather's portfolio was a family fund, despite the clear legal reality. I sat there in the dawn light, remembering a specific afternoon in my grandfather Arthur's old kitchen on Grand Avenue. I pictured him handing me the original estate papers across the worn wooden table. He had explicitly stated that he left Jennifer's name off the deed because he knew she would try to take it. He saw her entitlement long before I did. I contrasted this predatory phone call with how my cousin Jessica was treated. Jessica always received massive handouts. Right now, she was enjoying an unlimited cash budget for her upcoming private estate wedding, funded entirely by Jennifer and Robert. Meanwhile, I was routinely treated like an unpaid clerk, expected to manage the administrative burdens of the family while receiving absolutely nothing in return. I listened to Uncle Robert drone on about my supposed instability, but I did not argue. I did not scream. I did not beg them to undo what they had done. I hung up the phone instantly, without saying goodbye. This initial silence is often misunderstood by outsiders. People wonder why victims do not immediately explode into rage. But this is the invisible chain of the survivor. A victim's initial compliance or silence is not a sign of weakness or capitulation. It is a highly calculated survival mechanism. When you realize you are trapped in a room with predators, screaming only gives away your position. Remaining silent allows you to gather absolute, undeniable legal evidence. My silence was not surrender. It was a balance sheet being drawn up. I swung my legs out of bed, walked to my closet, and put on my navy professional blazer. I systematically packed 2 forms of government identification into my leather tote bag. I stood in front of the mirror and buttoned my jacket. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was entirely clinical. For decades, I had been the silent investor in their twisted version of a family. I had paid my dues in forced smiles, in overlooked boundaries, in accepting the role of the lesser cousin. Now I realized that familial affection had merely been a subscription, with me footing the bill. They believed I was soft enough to roll over and let them liquidate my future. They believed that because I had always avoided conflict, I would avoid a legal battle. But they fundamentally misunderstood the difference between avoiding drama and preparing for war. They had mistaken my lifelong patience for profound vulnerability. I grabbed my keys, locked the front door of my bungalow, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. The audit was about to begin. I arrived at First National Security Bank at exactly 8:50 in the morning, 10 minutes before the doors officially unlocked. I tapped on the glass until a security guard recognized me and let me inside. I was immediately escorted into the sleek, glass-walled office of the branch director, Mrs. Vance. She looked grave, her hands folded neatly over a pristine desk. Without engaging in any pleasantries, Mrs. Vance swiveled her large monitor around to face me. Displayed on the high-resolution screen was an electronic quitclaim deed. It had been filed through a remote digital portal 4 days prior, carrying what appeared to be a forged digital signature of my exact name. Attached to it was a fraudulent power of attorney document, which they had submitted to the bank hours earlier to freeze my operating accounts, clearing the way for them to seize the properties. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the document with the meticulous scrutiny of an appraiser evaluating a faulty foundation. I pointed out the fatal flaw on the screen. My genuine digital signature key requires a unique geometric cursive loop on the letter A, a stylized anchor I had adopted specifically for financial contracts. The document displayed on the monitor featured a plain, rigid, block capital letter A. It was a crude approximation, likely copied from a generic holiday greeting card or a discarded piece of mail. Mrs. Vance nodded slowly, her expression tightening. She then scrolled down to the second page to show the attached physician's declaration. It was printed on the letterhead of a supposedly established mental health facility called Apex Psychological Clinic, purportedly located in Oak Ridge. The document was signed by a non-existent doctor named Dr. Logan Sterling, and it explicitly stated that I was suffering from acute cognitive deficits. I felt a hollow laugh catch in my throat. Acute cognitive deficits. They were attempting to medically erase my autonomy to execute a hostile corporate takeover of my life. I did not waste time expressing shock. Instead, I shifted into a purely analytical state. I requested that the bank manager pull up the raw embedded XML metadata packet and the file transfer payload logs of the uploaded PDF form. In the digital age, a document is never just a document. It is a forensic footprint. Every file carries the hidden DNA of the machine that birthed it. Mrs. Vance's fingers flew across her keyboard, bypassing the visual document and diving into the administrative backend of the bank's secure portal. The monitor refreshed, displaying lines of dense code and system registry details. There, buried within the structural metadata, was the undeniable truth. The screen displayed the registered corporate device identification and the explicit MAC address of the originating scanner. It did not belong to a clinic in Oak Ridge. It belonged directly to Uncle Robert's private commercial mortgage brokerage office scanner. The IP routing verified that the document had been created, scanned, and uploaded from his local suburban network. They had not hired a sophisticated forgery ring. They had not carefully routed their traffic through anonymous servers. They were arrogant enough to manufacture a legal medical document on the exact same machine Uncle Robert used to process suburban loan applications. Their hubris was staggering. They had weaponized my mental health, forging a doctor's signature, and my own, entirely under the assumption that I would be too intimidated or too confused to look under the digital hood. This was not merely a betrayal, it was a spectacularly poorly executed fraud. I watched the cursor blink next to Uncle Robert's hardware serial number. For years, my aunt and uncle had projected an aura of absolute superiority, presenting themselves as the untouchable matriarch and patriarch of our extended family tree. They hosted the private estate weddings, they drove the least luxury vehicles, and they looked down their noses at my quiet, independent life. Yet here they were, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs so bright and glowing that a first-year auditor could have tracked it. I sat back in the leather guest chair, my posture perfectly straight. The emotional sting of their betrayal had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I was staring at a felony logged in plain text. I pulled my notebook from my tote bag and meticulously wrote down the device ID, the MAC address, and the precise timestamp of the upload. Mrs. Vance watched me, her professional demeanor giving way to quiet solidarity. I looked up from my notebook and met her eyes. The transaction was over. Now, it was time to collect the debt. I immediately declined any out-of-court settlement or internal bank mediation. This was no longer a family dispute. I requested the proper forms and formally signed a felony bank fraud reporting affidavit right there on Mrs. Vance's desk. With a few swift strokes of my pen, I transformed their greedy domestic scheme into a severe criminal forgery matter. Mrs. Vance promptly placed a hard security lock on all my accounts, sealing the $650,000 behind impenetrable administrative firewalls. She then picked up her secure telephone line and contacted Detective Miller from the County Financial Crimes and Fraud Squad. Within 20 minutes, Detective Miller arrived at the branch. He was a pragmatic, observant man who wasted no time. He sat beside me, reviewed the printed metadata log sheet, and traced the digital path from Uncle Robert's office scanner to the bank server. As it turned out, Detective Miller's division had already been monitoring Uncle Robert's brokerage for suspected mortgage non-compliance. My forensic metadata was the final, undeniable puzzle piece they needed to execute a pre-approved emergency arrest warrant. He noted with absolute clinical detachment that submitting falsified real estate instruments to a government institution constitutes an automatic, unarguable felony. Every digital fingerprint they left was another nail in the coffin of their freedom. As we discussed the forensic evidence, my phone began to vibrate relentlessly against the polished mahogany desk. The screen lit up with a continuous stream of frantic text messages from my cousin Jessica. She was demanding that I call Aunt Jennifer back immediately to stop making a scene. Jessica claimed her mother was highly distressed, hyperventilating in the kitchen, and that my reckless behavior was ruining the harmony of the family. The irony was palpable. They had attempted to steal my entire net worth before breakfast, but I was the one disrupting the peace. I flipped the phone face down, let them panic. Detective Miller turned his attention to the automated county filing system queue on his secure tablet. His eyes narrowed as he cross-referenced the fraudulent deeds processing status. He discovered that the perpetrators had not just submitted the document to the bank, they had scheduled an in-person appointment at the county recorder's office at exactly 11:15 in the morning to finalize the deed transfer. They were actually going to walk into a government building and attempt to legally finalize the theft. Detective Miller looked at me, a mixture of disbelief and professional curiosity on his face. He asked if my relatives were truly arrogant enough to show up in person after leaving such a blatant digital trail. I looked the detective dead in the eye and predicted exactly how the morning would unfold. I told him that my Aunt Jennifer relies entirely on a manufactured theatrical performance of maternal concern. She has spent decades perfecting the role of the long-suffering, benevolent caretaker. I mapped out the entire blueprint of her impending performance. I explained that she would inevitably arrive dressed immaculately, likely in a cream knit sweater to project softness and wealth. She would approach the counter, cry instantly on cue, and present the falsified medical receipts to paint me as mentally unstable and entirely incapable of managing my own affairs. She would use her softest, most sympathetic voice to convince the clerks that she was merely stepping in to save her poor, incapacitated niece from financial ruin. Detective Miller listened intently, taking notes as I broke down their psychological playbook. I wasn't guessing. I was forecasting based on decades of empirical data. My family had always used performative respectability as a shield. They believed that if they looked wealthy and acted appropriately concerned, no bureaucratic clerk would ever dare question their paperwork. They relied on social friction to grease the wheels of their fraud. I finished my assessment, folded my hands, and waited. The detective closed his notepad with a decisive snap. The preparation phase was complete. We had the metadata, we had the forged signature. We had the fake psychiatric evaluation from Oak Ridge. And now, we had their exact destination and arrival time. The trap was fully set, meticulously constructed from their own arrogance and greed. I did not feel a shred of guilt. They had built this gallows with their own hands. I was merely providing the rope. The clock on the wall read 10:45 in the morning. It was time to head to the county recorder's office and watch the curtain rise on their final act. At exactly 11:15 in the morning, Aunt Jennifer entered the expansive marble lobby of the county recorder's office. She was wearing a tailored cream knit sweater, projecting exactly the aura of soft, maternal affluence I had predicted. Uncle Robert walked one step behind her, carrying a thick brown leather folder tucked under his arm. From my vantage point in the secure observation room behind the main desk, I watched them approach the counter with absolute predatory confidence. Jennifer leaned into the desk clerk, using a soft, trembling voice that resonated perfectly in the echoing hall. She explained that her beloved niece was experiencing severe emotional instability and acute cognitive decline. She dabbed at the corner of her eye, pleading that they must secure the $650,000 property line immediately to protect the estate from my supposed delusions. It was a flawless performance, rehearsed over a lifetime of manipulation. Detective Miller stepped out calmly from the secure back room. He walked up to the counter, presented his gold badge, and smoothly interrupted her monologue. He politely asked Jennifer to provide her government identification alongside the original physical copy of the quitclaim deed to verify the filing. Aunt Jennifer deployed her rehearsed performance on cue. She began crying softly, pressing her manicured hand to her chest, assuring the detective that they were a tight-knit family acting purely out of profound parental protection. She claimed the situation was a heartbreaking tragedy. Detective Miller let her cry for exactly 10 seconds before he surgically cut through the performance. Ignoring her tears entirely, he turned his gaze to Uncle Robert. He asked Uncle Robert to state, under penalty of perjury, the specific internet protocol address and the physical location used to digitally upload the document from the alleged clinic. The air in the lobby suddenly grew thick. Uncle Robert stammered, his insurance salesman polish cracking instantly. He nervously named a city 2 hours away, completely contradicting the electronic device timestamps the detective already held. The desk clerk then slid a printed report across the counter, revealing that the scanner's digital trail matched Robert's personal home network down to the final digit. The illusion of their superiority evaporated into the sterile, air-conditioned breeze of the government building. This moment exposes the core fallacy of predatory abusers. It is the illusion of power from an empty wallet. My aunt and uncle had constructed an entire identity around the appearance of untouchable social status and unearned authority. But that status was nothing more than a fragile shell, a borrowed suit of armor funded by leveraging and stealing assets that did not belong to them. A predator's manufactured social standing shatters instantly, the moment their financial leverage is stripped away by the cold, unforgiving reality of the rule of law. When their fake wealth was removed, they were not masterminds. They were just common thieves standing in a lobby, caught in a lie. Uncle Robert tried to step backward, holding his hands up defensively, as if he could physically push away the metadata. Aunt Jennifer's artificial tears stopped abruptly, replaced by a mask of stark, unfiltered panic. The cream-knit sweater suddenly looked less like a symbol of wealth and more like a target. Uniformed officers stepped out from the adjacent hallway, moving with quiet, undeniable authority. The sharp, heavy click of metal handcuffs echoed sharply against the marble walls of the lobby. It was the loudest, most definitive sound I had ever heard. Both Jennifer and Robert were placed under arrest on multiple felony warrant charges. I watched Aunt Jennifer's face contort in utter disbelief as the cold steel locked around her wrists. She opened her mouth, perhaps to demand to speak to a manager or to leverage some imaginary social connection, but the officers simply recited her rights, their voices devoid of any emotional inflection. Uncle Robert's shoulders sagged, the posture of a defeated man realizing his own paperwork had forged his prison sentence. They had spent decades writing checks on my emotional bank account, assuming the funds were infinite, but today their access was permanently revoked. I felt no triumph, no euphoric rush of adrenaline. I only felt the profound, settling weight of a transaction closing. The balance sheet of my life had been audited, the toxic liabilities had been identified, and they were now being permanently liquidated from my future. The dominoes fell with relentless mathematical precision. Within 24 hours of the lobby arrests, cousin Jessica and her fiancé were intercepted at their sprawling private residence. They were brought in and formally charged with compounding grand larceny and electronic signature tampering, their dream wedding budget abruptly seized as evidence of fraud. Following almost a year of grueling legal proceedings, the trial completely dismantled the familial facade. Aunt Jennifer was sentenced to 72 months in state prison for federal real estate fraud and forgery. Uncle Robert received a much harsher penalty of 96 months behind bars, heavily influenced by the prosecution uncovering his prior mortgage compliance violations. Jessica's assets were fully liquidated to cover legal penalties, wiping out the unearned luxury she had paraded for years. I attended the final sentencing hearing, sitting quietly in the third row of the courtroom. I wore a dark emerald wool blazer, the exact one my grandfather Arthur had bought for my college graduation. I sat with perfect posture, my expression unreadable, as the judge handed down the sentences. I did not nod or smile when they were led away. I simply watched the final closure of the account. The very next day, I completely isolated my asset base. I transferred the entire $650,000 commercial retail portfolio into an ironclad trust, protected by a rigorous legal structure and dual custodian authorization protocol. I officially assigned my closest friend from my early banking career as the sole emergency executor of the estate. By doing this, I ensured my biological relatives were permanently and legally barred from ever touching my life, my health directives, or my finances again. This brings me to the absolute truth about blood and loyalty. Severing ties with toxic blood relatives is not an act of betrayal. It is not an act of malice or vengeance. It is a courageous act of profound justice that honors your true worth. We are conditioned to believe that family is an unbreakable contract, an unlimited pass for disrespect and exploitation. But an abusive family member is simply a liability holding you back from your own potential. Dropping that liability is the highest form of self-respect. When you cut away the people who view your life as their personal bank account, you are not destroying a family. You are finally building a foundation where your true self can stand without being taxed for existing. I look back on that morning, the flashing crimson banner on my phone, and I realize it was the greatest gift they could have given me. It forced me to stop playing the silent, reliable background character and step into the executive role of my own life. I've come to realize that forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free. But forgiveness does not require a reunion, and it certainly does not require granting them access to your peace. I forgave them from a distance, behind layers of legal armor and newfound strength. True family does not forge your signature or weaponize your sanity. If you're ready to protect your own life, subscribe and stand tall with me. Script completed.